year for each athlete that I work with, or each group that I tends to be more athletes, definitely centered. But if I'm a high school coach who's got hundreds of athletes, then it may just be for the group that you do it for. Pieces of the plan. So as you're writing your plan, again, then that's just the outline of it. Then you start to work as writing for weekly workouts. The things that you look as I write, and with MVA services, we always look at like jog or jog mobility, and that's working through all the planes. We're moving, we're running, not just jog laps to jog. We're jogging and we're moving through things. So it's like you look and you'll see there's skip and stoop and sagittal plane stuff, transverse plane things, frontal plane things, and so we do that. After usually like a lap or two of jog mobility or whatever, then we come back and I give them about 10 to 15 minutes of their own where they can roll out, do some Eldoas, joint stretch, whatever it may be. And so people say, oh, I don't like static stretching. Again, I don't mind for the athlete. I tell them, make sure that they're working on their quads, their hips, not their hamstrings as much, but maybe their calves, their feet, and getting that kind of work in. And then we go through dynamic flexibility, which tends to be on the ground, moving through ranges of motion, getting things moved, turned on. I don't like the expression turned on because I feel like you always turn on as long as you're awake. But making sure that we warm up that joint and ligament for each kind of movement that we're trying to do. Muscle mobility, band work, that's where from dynamic flexibility tend to say, this is the upright work that we do, where instead of laying down and doing like iron crosses and scorpions, things like that, we're on our feet, getting our ankles, working up through our body. So going from the toes, through the ankles, through the shins, through the knees, through the hips, through the back, through the arms, shoulders, neck, everything. So we just start to work, and it's more dynamic movements that we're trying to move through things. And I like band work here, so it gets a little bit more sidewalks with the bands around the ankles or the knees, clamshells, things like that. Fence drills, another thing I incorporate, not all the time, but this is obviously range of motion. We're doing hurdle drills, and that's not just good for hurdlers, it's good for everybody. Leg swings, all those different kind of things. Then from there, we get into walking drills, and this is where we tend to do some of the things to warm up our, in a linear motion or even side to side. We start to get the body movement, but we start walking before we start to run. And I believe that. And then we get into sprint drills, or we'll call them mock drills. And that's where, I'm different. I like, if we're doing acceleration that day, I try to keep all the drills smaller, low heel recovery. So we don't do high knee A's, we do low knee A's, or low skip A's, or low B's. We don't do the full range of motion. But if we're doing a max velocity sprint day, or we're starting to open up, then we'll do higher A's, like high knees, higher ranges of motion, bigger amplitudes of movement, stuff like that. Then in that, we get technical work. Obviously, we do technical work before we get to some of the fatiguing work. Then, whether that's jumping for the day, whether that's, blocks out of the hurdles, doing some hurdle stuff, whatever it may be, sprint, technical sprints, whatever it is. And you got to understand, some of the technical work is part of the workout. So it's part of the training. So make sure that you're incorporating it accordingly. And then we get to the core of the workout. What are we trying to do that day? So for a day we're on the runway, we may also do accelerations out of the blocks, or just accelerations, because it kind of mirrors it. So we'll do maybe some sled pulls. Maybe we'll do some hill sprints, short ones for like 10, 20, 30 meters, things like that. And then other days we have longer things. We may do like 120s, 150s, fly 90s, fly 60s, tend to be a little bit more power, or, just further endurance, strength endurance work for a jumper at least, and so forth like that. And then, so we keep those themes and keep those ideologies the same. After, again, one thing I hated sometimes, especially with my college athletes, is they just would leave, and we do need to cool down, because I think the importance of cool down is it gets you ready for your next session. So the better cool down you have, the better you're going to be able to come back the next day. And that's, again, where we start to incorporate rollout, Eldoa, stretching. We start to incorporate some of the therapies like ice baths, things like that. Things that we're able to incorporate to help the athlete recover. Very much highly believe in the contrast bath, so going warm to cold. Um, doing This is where we do our static stretching. This is where we start to incorporate the modalities that we get from our sports medicine and so forth like that. I really, really like that. And then days, not all days, and then we talk about, potentially weights after that, or if it's set up maybe in the morning before practice. But that's for another plan or another talk where we'll talk a lot more about specific of the weights. Here's training inventory. I'm not going to go through it, but I talked a little bit about it. The jog mobilities. The way I got tired of doing the same workout. So here you've got all these different training components, jog mobilities. There's 5 of them. So I'd start off, and maybe that day I use, it's like a kind of a menu. I use jog mobility number 4. And then I come back, they roll out, stretch for 10 minutes. Then I might use dynamic flexibility number 2. And then I might use muscle mobility number 1. And then I'll fence drills number 2. And then that day we'll do 6 hurdle ABC, so we'll do that. And then this day's acceleration day, so we may do acceleration drills number 1. And so that would be the components of the warm up and how I start to write. And then after that would be our technique, and then after that would be our workout, a core part of our workout, and then potentially if we had weights that day, cool down, and then weights and so forth like that. But this is just an example of every coach. They should have a training inventory for the athletes so that they can, follow through. Weekly plan. Again, this is we went from meso, micro, and we're talking about the microcycle. And you see 7 days, the intensity of loads of how much we have in there, the theme what we write, and the dates and the event group. And so this is where that last page of all those training inventories get written. So this would be like jog mobility number 1, and dynamic flexibility number 2, and this would start to come in each day and write, so the athletes know how and why we design the workouts the way they start to design, and it makes sure that we're staying on the theme. And then this would be a daily kind of thing. I think that just with the weekly workouts, that works good. If there's a very specific thing you're trying to do for that day, sometimes I will write out single session planners. Like we have a Friday plyometric, or we call it pack training. So I write that out so that they can follow it. But for the most part, I don't write out a session planner that often at all from the weekly workouts. I will do this for myself if I'm trying to take notes because we had some kind of testing, or if we had some kind of thing that I like to write down just in a folder, like, okay, this is how fast we ran our 120s or our hill sprints, and the date and kind of the setup and everything else like that. But this session planner, we definitely tend not to write out as much because, again, a lot of it is written down when you do your microcycle plan. Finally, the last things I'll talk about, the key to successful plans is, again, general to more specific. I talked about that. Individualization is much more important than specificity. So as the athletes get more specific, you've got to be conscious of the individuality of the athlete. So a perfect example I'll use is a 1-2 kid versus a 2-4 kid. So let's just say for the 200, and we're training the kid as a 200 athlete, even though I know we tend to do it in different events. But if the kid is a 200 athlete that has a lot of promise in the 100, their work capacity will probably be generally lower than an athlete who is a 2-4 kid. So if you were trying to do 8 150s with the kid who's a 2-4 kid, the speed component of it, or how fast they run it, might be too fast, and they break down that way, where the kid who's a 1-2 kid, and then a 150, they would do very, very well, and it'd be really, really good for them. Now, on the other end, if we're doing the same workout, instead of a 200, we're talking about 300s, and that 2-4 kid did 6 300s, and it was awesome for him, did great, and they responded well to it. Where the 1-2 kid do 6 300s, and he's throwing up before the end of the workout. So that's the specificity I'm talking about, is knowing your athlete and knowing what kind of workouts are great for that athlete and what benefits them. And so as you get more specific, you're going to have to start to dictate workouts for the athlete. Strength training definitely should complement enhanced training. So I just feel like as coaches, you should really increase your knowledge here. I have my USA weightlifting certification. I have my CSCS. I have my master's in exercise physics and biomechanics, and I love strength training. It's one of the things, but it's also because of the fact that I never want to just give the strength training to the athletes and be like, okay, you go do it. Now, there's times where you can't be in there for whatever reason. So if so, then you better have a good relationship with your strength coach. My strength coach that I work with, Jamie um, Myers, who's at the training center here in Chula Vista, he comes to practice all the time, and we have conversations before every cycle with what weights, how we're doing, and why we're doing it. And he's got full autonomy to either make things heavier, make things lighter, change the workout to put something else in. And that's because he's out at my practice. We have conversations, and even though I write them, I do it with his not just blessing, but with his knowledge and his input. And so I'm very fortunate there. As we start to talk about themes, make sure that you keep themes parallel. And what that means is that you're training that day. If you're trying to train for acceleration, you're trying to train for power that day, make sure that the strength training, the track training, the technique, all make sure they're all parallel with each other, that they're all complement each other. Because if you're trying to do other things in different aspects, then it's hard. So perfect example is if I'm doing accelerations, which is a very quick, very dynamic thing, then in the weight room, I'm going to make sure that I have exercises that complement that. So weightlifting things, box jumps, Olympic lifts, box jumps, things that are quick and fast and really responding well. Now, if I'm doing 150s, and that tends to be more of, I know there's no such thing as static, but it is longer, slower, higher ground contact kind of sprints, then I may do, those are the days we may do squats and we may do deadlifts and things that are moving slow. And then obviously there's times where we have to mix the two. And then we can talk later about specificity in that the strength training, which will be a later talk. Again, watch out as you measure volume and intensity. I think that's really important. You've got to be careful with that because if you increase volume and intensity, you can get the athlete hurt. So you got to be careful there. And also, not giving enough volume when you're high in intensity could also be detrimental. And there's definitely differences between men and women with volume and intensity and their ability to handle those things. So you've got to be careful, do some research on it, read things about peaking, even though we don't like that term, but working with your athletes. And sometimes it really is, you do the best you can with it, and as time goes on, you learn what works and doesn't work. I know that the volume tends to be a little bit higher with my females as we get in the intensity and we get towards the championship part of the season. And our men, definitely the intensity is high and our volume is lower. So there's differences there. And again, the biggest thing about these plans is they're a guide. They're not a blueprint. They're not the end-all be-all of what they're trying to do. They're supposed to be a guide so that you can be successful and you can stay on task as coaches with what we're trying to do, as an athletes with what you're trying to do. Again, as coaches, we're not the captain, we're the navigators. Okay, we're navigating our athletes because at the end of the day, you can sit there and say you're the captain, and if there's not buy-in, and if the athlete doesn't want to do it, you can't make them do it. And so that's why you're the navigator. Whether you trick them into it, whether you motivate them into it, whether you don't get them connected with them, you're definitely the navigator. And so it's your goal. It's our goal as coaches and the goal of the athlete who wants to be the best, that you navigate them in the right direction. And sometimes we make mistakes, but the thing is to learn from it and move forward with it. And so those are just the keys to successful plans and how to write successful plans.